Thank you for watching this recording of our live OneClick Q&A webinar. The topics we covered are listed in front of you with approximate start times. The recording will start shortly. Okay, now we've just started recording, and as I say, the first question we have is for Jeff Richardson. How do I get started with Open Integration?
Thanks very much, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. So Open Integration is a module within OneClick which allows you to collate data from various external bookkeeping systems. And once you've brought that data into the OneClick environment, you can use that data to feed into services that you're providing for your clients. So perhaps the generation of statutory accounts or the quarterly reporting for making tax digital, for example. So I think perhaps the best way to kind of illustrate that is to do a few minutes just having a quick walkthrough of what that process looks like. So here I am, I've logged in as an advisor to my OneClick environment, and here on the main workspace you can see there's a tile for Open Integration. So when I click that, we load up a dashboard screen, and this just gives you some high-level information about how you're using Open Integration within your practice. On the left-hand side here, you have a list of all the businesses that your clients have, which comes from your central environments. And what I'm going to do now is pick one of these businesses and connect it to its bookkeeping source. So I'm looking for a business called Stark Industries. You can use the typical sort of search facilities that you see at the top of the grid here. And there's the business I'd like to connect. Currently, you can see that it's not connected to its bookkeeping source because it has a status of not active. So I have to answer a series of configuration questions on this Setup tab. So the first one is to select the source of data. So in this example, Stark Industries does their bookkeeping within Xero. So I'm going to select that the data is coming from a bookkeeping product. And here you can see the list of the bookkeeping products that we currently support within Open Integration. Xero, QuickBooks, Exact, Twinfield, and Sage 1. So in this case, I'll select Xero. And here we have two questions just helping us sort of profile the business that we're connecting. So in this case, it's a sole trade, and here about standard industry classifications. So it doesn't really matter what I select here, but we just asked to give a little bit of profiling information about this business. And then once I've done that, I can click the Connect button. When I click Connect, that will ask me to log into Xero using my Xero credentials. So in this case, I'm going to enter these credentials. And if I type those correctly, when I log in, I'll see a list of all the Xero data sets that I have access to using my Xero credentials. In this case, I only have one in my list, but otherwise, normally you'd see a drop-down list here. And I'm going to allow access. So at this point, we've completed the process of connecting the business, Stark Industries, within Open Integration to its bookkeeping source. And now you can see that it's linked to Xero. A couple of items here that might be worth just touching upon. So when we've made the connection, the system automatically does a synchronization. And what that means is Open Integration is reaching out to Xero and requesting a copy of all the bookkeeping transactions that are held within Xero for this business. And the status tab gives you a kind of audit trail showing you the different synchronizations that have happened. Once the business is set up, the synchronizations will happen on a nightly cadence automatically, so that you know you've always got up to the moment data held within your open integration system. If you do need to do a manual sync, you can do that from the Setup tab using this button here. You're also able to see the data that's been brought in from Xero on the Data tab here. We do get some questions about the Mappings tab. So actually this information here is mapping the Xero chart of accounts that this data set is using to financial categories that will support the Making Tax Digital quarterly reporting. So if you've linked a business that's not a sole trade, because it doesn't apply to Making Tax Digital quarterly reporting, you'll see a blank. There'll be no information to display on the mapping tab. It will be blank, but that's correct. Okay, so as you can see now, we've connected our business to its Xero bookkeeping source. We've done the synchronization and we've brought in some bookkeeping data. So that's now held within the open integration environment. And just going to give a quick demonstration now of one example of how you can use that information. So in this case, I'm going to flip back into my central environment. And I'm going to search for this client, Stark Industries in Central. Now here's the Accounts Production tab. So going into that accounting period, you can see initially we have no trial balance yet for this accounting period. And there's an option here to effectively bring the trial balance in from open integration. So I'm going to select that and click Synchronize. Okay, so the first thing that's come up here is a kind of inbound mapping screen. So in this case, there are two codes that have been used, two nominal account codes that have been used within Xero that we don't know where to map those to the accounts production charts of accounts. So it's asking me to provide that mapping. So I'm just going to fill that in. A really good tip here is you can actually create a new nominal code in accounts production directly at this point in the process by pressing the F10 key, and that will bring up the Add Nominal screen, which you may recognize if you're bringing data in from a CSV file, for example, into accounts production. So in this case, I'm going to search. Okay, and once I've mapped these two codes, I can continue bringing the data in, and we get a message saying synchronization complete. So now when I look at the trial balance, I can see that that has now arrived from open integration, and that's my starting point for going off and now generating my set of statutory accounts. So very quick overview, but hopefully that's gives some understanding of how you can get started with open integration. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks, Jeff. Before we hand over to Amanda, though, I do have one question for Jeff, and that is, can you show how you can process a journal in accounts production and send it back to the bookkeeping solution? And is that an automatic synchronization back to the bookkeeping solution, or does the user have to do something to make that happen?
Yeah, good question, Richard. So let's pick up the trail here. So we brought in the trial balance. It's come directly from Xero. Because we bring it in at the transactional level, I can actually drill in and see individual transactions that make up the balance on a particular nominal code. But as Richard alluded to, you might realize there's perhaps been a misposting within Xero, or you wish to make some sort of amendment to the data. So what you can do in accounts production is create a journal or an audit journal. And when you post that, open integration allows you to synchronize that change all the way back through to the source bookkeeping data, so in this case from Xero. So let's have a quick look at that together. So in this case, I'm going to assume there was a misposting, and we'll just correct that here. So I'm going to post that correction. And if I go back to the sync with open integration screen here and click synchronize again, this process now is going to take the amendment that I've made there and push that back up to open integration. And you can see here one transaction has gone back to open integration. Normally at that point, the next time open integration does its nightly synchronization run, that adjustment journal will get posted all the way back through to 0 without you having to do anything further. And this really resolves one of the sort of pain points that we hear about. So before we had this two-way synchronization, if the advisor's made any adjustments or corrections in AP, perhaps they'd have to go and log on to 0 directly and rekey that same adjustments, or perhaps you provide a spreadsheet back to your client detailing the transactions that they need to adjust in 0 and sort of hope that they've done that correctly. So this two-way synchronization option that we have now within open integration hopefully significantly reduces one of those key pain points.
Two more questions have just come in for you, Jeff. First one is this is from Sebastian, and I'm interpreting the question. His question was, is it a TB or nominal ledger import, which I assume Sebastian is asking, is it at a summarised general ledger account level or at a transactional level?
Yeah, so as you can see, the data we bring in is at a transaction level. So when I look at the trial balance here, I can actually drill into any individual nominal code and see the individual transactions that are posted on there. One thing perhaps just to highlight, that batch ref there is also the transaction ID that comes from 0. So if you do want to tie up the transaction back in 0, you can use the batch ref to identify it.
Thanks, Jeff. And a second question, this time for Phil, about plans for open integration with other products, including Sage 950.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a key part of the open integration proposition is, irrespective of the bookkeeping solution that you're using, you'll be able to use it within CCH OneClick. So what that means is, over time, we will be adding more and more bookkeeping providers, and of course, Sage 50 is one of the main providers. So we will absolutely be looking to add that to the open integration in time. I can't at this moment give any dates as to when that will be available, but it is absolutely on in our thought processes to be able to add that into the open integration.
Thanks, Phil. Just one more question before we hand over to Amanda. It's just come in from Alistair. I'm reading it as we speak. If you're midway through an accounts job that takes a few days and you don't want the automatic synchronization back to the bookkeeping solution yet, how can we control that?
A good question again. So at the minute, they don't have a way in accounts production to control which adjustments you've made that gets synced back into the source bookkeeping system. So the only way at the minute is to avoid pressing the synchronization button until you're good and ready. I think this is something that we're interested in hearing feedback from users that are starting to engage with open integration and use that to make their processes more efficient. So if that's an area where you think we'd benefit from adding a bit more control, perhaps task permissions or having some sort of flag on the transaction to indicate that it's been approved to go back to 0 or whichever bookkeeping system, that's something that we could perhaps put onto user voice and get an idea of who's would also benefit from that sort of development. So yeah, an open area that we can explore in the future.
And just with that, the best way of people communicating back to you as a product manager or a product owner is to use user voice?
User voice is a really powerful tool for us. Yeah, it allows us to see exactly kind of collectively what our customers are thinking about and what's on their wish list. So an item with lots of votes on user voice is helpful for us to see, and we can feed that into our planning process. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. So another key component of OneClick is the Making Text Digital functionality, and Amanda is just about to move in front of the computer so as we can touch on a few questions that we've been asked relating to Making Text Digital. The first question, similar to what Jeff was asked about open integration, very generic, is how do I get started with making text digital?
Thanks, Richard. Okay, so there's a couple of steps needed to set the practice up for making text digital. And the first one actually isn't within OneClick. It's a process that each practice needs to go through with HMRC. So you may have heard that there is a new agent services account that each practice needs to set up. And with this agent services account, it will give access to the new APIs that HMRC are developing. These APIs are how our OneClick software communicates with HMRC and how we can digitally get this data. So when you go through a process with HMRC to sign up for those agent services credentials, there's a second step that you go through where all of your existing agent credentials, so you'll have your existing agent codes with your associated user ID and passwords, you would go through a process of associating those with your new agent services account, and that sets up the 64/8 relationships that you'll have with all your clients, which means that when you get started with making tax digital, all your clients that you already act for should be there. So then the step once you're in OneClick is actually quite straightforward. So within the Making Tax Digital products, we've got a settings area. And within here, this is where you set the practice up so that it can communicate with HMRC. So I'm actually going to clear the token that we've got here and I'll go through the authorization process. So if I click on authorize, so you come through to HMRC's website and it gives a bit of information about what needs to happen at this stage. So there's an extra step that those of you using this in the actual live environment will go through, which is two-step verification. So that's two-factor authentication is another phrase you may have heard for it. So when you go to authorize the software, it will just check that the person doing it is actually authorized to do so. So it's security HMRC have introduced to protect all of your client data. So moving on to the next step, it's very similar to as you're used to doing at the moment, logging on to HMRC's website. So it would just be the user ID and password for your new agent services credentials. Just let me type my one out. Hopefully I got that right. So then the final step is that it tells you what exactly OneClick is asking to interact with HMRC for. So at the moment it's to access your client's self-assessment information and to be able to change that information as well. The other thing to note is that generally speaking, this permission will last for an 18-month period. However, as HMRC expands the APIs, so the different elements that we can communicate with, you may have to re-grant authority to get access to extra information. So, for example, for VAT, you may have to go through this again just to be able to on the particular VAT elements. So, in clicking grant authority, I'm back into the OneClick practice, and we're now authorized to communicate with HMRC's APIs.
So once connected, next question that we've had from email in advance is what can I do with Making Tax Digital once I'm connected? So how do I make submissions? What reporting have I got available to myself?
Okay. So then, okay, next step, if we look at our all clients list, this is showing a list of all individual clients at the moment that exist in the central database. So if I look at an example client, so I'm looking for Bucky Barnes, that's one I set up earlier. There's a few things here that you can do within Making Tax Digital. So the digital tax account we'll look at separately in a minute, because it's slightly different to the rest of what's in here. So the Making Tax Digital, which is the quarterly reporting side of things when I refer to Making Tax Digital, lives in the other tabs. So there's a bit of configuration that you would have to do for each client. So by looking at the configuration tab, you can see I've got a business that belongs to my client Bucky Barnes, and this one has shown here because it's one that's set up through it's an association that exists in Central. So this business within Central's database is actually a separate sole trade business record. It's one that has already gone through the open integration setup. So as Jeff went through earlier, it's going through that process of connecting it to the bookkeeping provider to have access to the bookkeeping information. So then the step that we haven't got at the moment that is required to be able to do the Making Tax Digital quarterly submissions is to configure it for Making Tax Digital. So if I click on the business, here the key thing that needs to be set up is this HMRC subscription. And again, this is a process that is controlled by HMRC. So it's a web page that they have on their website, where for each of your clients who want to initially take part in the Making Tax Digital for income tax pilot that's going on at the moment, but also it will be the same process for when this is no longer a pilot, but when it's actually compulsory to do, is they have to go through a process of subscribing themselves to Making Tax Digital. So it's very similar to how you have to tell HMRC that your client has to do a tax return. You also have to tell HMRC that your client is required to do Making Tax Digital quarterly submissions once it's compulsory, or at the moment it's obviously subscribing clients who are interested in taking part in the pilot. And during that process of signing a client up, you tell HMRC of any of their self-employment businesses that exist and some information around that, so accounting periods. And additionally, you also tell them if there's any land and property that they currently hold, because both of these elements are things that do quarterly submissions. So for this particular case, we've got the company. So the Bucky Barnes would have gone through that sign-up process. We would have said that we've only got a single self-employment business, which is this winter heating company. So by selecting that, what it's then doing in HMRC systems is it's matching the business that we've got in OneClick with the business that lives in HMRC system. And this is just to ensure that when we send the quarterly submissions to HMRC, it's definitely going to the correct business. So it's just a step to go through to make sure that the one that you think you're updating is definitely the one that HMRC are receiving it for. So then if we click save on this, I'll just go back out. Always fun when it goes right. There we go. So MTD configured is now set up. And what this means is that if we go over to quarterly reporting, I'll just click that away. The business now appears on this quarterly reporting tab. And this will be where the submissions to HMRC are made from. So there's some useful information here. So it shows the bookkeeping provider that is connected in open integration. And it shows the accounting period, which we've actually pulled down from HMRC, as it's information, as I said, that's provided during the sign-up process. So then by going into the client, it's then a case of, you can see that it shows each of the quarters that you have to submit for. You can see the income and expenses along with the profit per accounts and taxable profit that will be submitted for that quarter. And then it's a simple case of clicking send to HMRC, and that will update the accounts. I will click on this, but I think I've got unmapped categories in open integration, but we'll have a look at that. So am I sure I want to submit? Yes. Oh, there we go, it did actually submit. So I've not got any unmapped ones for this one. So submission successful. So that's now updated HMRC systems, which then we record in a couple of places. So if I go to the status tab, this will actually record any submissions that we make to HMRC. So you see who submitted it, the business it relates to, the accounting period, the quarter that was submitted, the fact it was a successful submission. And you can then click on that and actually see what exactly was submitted to HMRC. And if I go back out, the other key thing that HMRC are trying to get out of quarterly reporting and making tax digital is to try and give taxpayers a better idea of what their tax liability for a tax year will be. So the other thing that we get out of this is actually a tax calculation, which if I click on that, you can drill into. I'm afraid that our version in our test environment, they actually just give us some set figures, so it's not a particularly good example, this one, but it would be relevant to your particular client at that point. And that's kind of an overview of the quarterly submissions.
Andrew has just asked a question. Can you show where you can get into the Making Tax Digital functionality? He says that all he can see on his OneClick is the landing page and the activity feed and sync with Central.
So it sounds, it actually sounds to me that you are probably logging in under the admin logins. Now, when you go to activate OneClick, you are prompted to create an admin account, which I believe the system says to use a unique ID email address, preferably one that you're not actually using within Central itself, because obviously what you want is you want to activate your email address in order to log in as an employee rather than an admin. Now, what I would suggest is that you contact support to raise a ticket for this, and what support can do is it can change the email address that you use to log into admin to another email address, and that will allow you to activate yourself with a proper employee account for OneClick. And when you do that, you will be able to see the normal tiles that Amanda's showing at the moment.
And Andrew has just confirmed that he's logging in as the admin account, so that does answer the question. Phil, a question for you while we're on the subject of Making Tax Digital is how do I register to get involved with the Making Tax Digital pilot?
Okay, there's two pilots. For the functionality that Amanda's just shown, which is for the income tax pilot, that's just moved into public beta. So there is a couple of ways that you can go around doing this. One is to contact the revenue directly, and then once you've done that and done everything that's required, contact us and we can help you with that. Or alternatively, I would be happy to help people through that process as well.
Thanks, Phil. Amanda, the earlier question that came through from email was also about reporting once they have done Making Tax Digital submissions. Are you able to just explain what we have available there, please?
Yep. So looking back at the Making Tax Digital area we've got, if we look at the menu here, the first one I went in through was the all clients list, and this shows, as I said, all of the clients that are in your central database for all the individuals. The additional one that we've not looked at is the quarterly reporting progress area. So if I click on that one, what this will do is actually show businesses in respect of Making Tax Digital. So for example, if we look at Bucky Barnes, who I set up earlier, you can see that it's Making Tax Digital ready because I set it up so that it's both got a bookkeeping source of information and it's got that set up with the business record in HMRC system, but also it gives next submission dates, which you've got control to order these and actually see what the most recent dates are to be able to help guide you through upcoming submissions for that.
And Phil, this question's come through from email last week, but also from Alistair just now.
So I'll read Alistair's question. It is, are there any plans, or what are our plans for VAT functionality for making tax digital in the future?
Yeah, so CCH OneClick will have VAT filing functionality that is in development at the moment. It's our #1 priority at the moment to get that delivered. And the plan is for that to be available by October. So that gives our customers a full 6 months within the VAT pilot as well before the go live date in April.
So our next question is for Amanda, talking about digital tax account. So Amanda touched on it earlier, and the question received by email last week, very straightforward question. How do I set up the DTA for my clients, and when will the updated information become available?
Yep, so as I mentioned earlier, there's the agent services account, which is for making tax digital and quarterly reporting. There's actually that one isn't needed for the digital tax account information, and in fact the digital tax account information just uses all of your existing user IDs and passwords, so your existing agent credentials. When I say the digital tax account information, for anyone who's not familiar with it, what this is it's information that HMRC holds about taxpayers that is to aid the completion of your client's tax returns. So it's also referred to as pre-population data, because we'll be using it down the line to be able to help you pre-populate a client's tax return. So if I go into Central, so if you're familiar with the existing personal tax area for where the credentials are stored, you see it's the online filing area. What you see here is that we store the user ID and passwords for a practice. So this varies practice to practice. So some of you may only have a single credential that works across all offices, or if you're only one office. Other sites have got multiple offices, so you've got multiple credentials set up, and other ones you've got the kind of employee level credentials. So the way it works for accessing the digital tax account data is that you need to try and use the credentials that the client, when you log into HMRC systems, are like logged under. So the credentials that you would find that client under in HMRC systems. So what we do is we take it in the order of, we'll look at the client record. So in fact, let me show you what we look at first. I'll go through authorization in a second. So we look at the, on the responsibility tab, you've got department, office and company. So we will take this information first, and you'll see here I've got the office is Portsmouth. So it would actually use the credentials for the Portsmouth office when trying to access HMRC's information. If you don't have this set up, then the next step it uses is it will go to the this top level area in the online filing. And if this doesn't exist, then it will then look at each of your employee records and use what you might have set up there, which if I just jump over to an employee record, so it's the online filing details area over here. So setting up setting up Central to work with the DTA information, it's again relatively straightforward, similar to how I did it in OneClick. So if I click on not authorized, because this one is one I've not actually set up at this point, you just authorize credentials. And it's very similar to the last page we saw. So again, it tells you what happens. So some information HMRC give, which again will include two-step verification, which in our test system it doesn't. So if I go through, sorry, it's slowing. Oh, I seem to have a problem with the machine I'm on, I'm afraid. Just what you want. That would go through a process of stepping through, signing in, and then as we saw on the OneClick page, it would just be a grant authority button. And when you click on that, it would then change to showing as authorized in the system. With OneClick, there's a couple of extra steps you need to do. So following this, you would just need to make sure that a sync runs. So either you can, if we go into File, Maintenance, OneClick, and then into the Sync Worker Management Console, you can run the synchronization here, and this would send that token that we get back from HMRC, so the authorization that we've got in place, it sends it up into OneClick, so you've got access to that client, or it would just get picked up in the next automatic sync that runs every half an hour for most cases. So then once you've done that, if I then go into particular clients, so here we've got Bucky Barnes again. The digital tax account is where we'll access this information from HMRC. So if I click on the 17-18 tax year, and just give that a second to run because it's actually calling HMRC's APIs at the moment, this will then show any information that HMRC hold in their system. So in this particular case, we have to have everything set up. So it's got some employment information, benefits, national insurance contributions, etc., etc. What I will point out, if I go into an earlier tax year that I've not set up, where HMRC don't hold any information, what you will see is a 404 not found response. So no data is currently held for this source. This isn't an error per se, this is just HMRC informing you that either they hold no information for that source, so this taxpayer actually doesn't have that information, or it's actually before HMRC have gone through their reconciliation period, and it's during this period that this information actually gets added into the digital tax account, and then we can access it and show you that information. I think there was another question about the dates information is available from. Yeah. So it varies depending on the source of information. So as you can see, we've got different groups of information here. I'll just keep it on this list. So marriage allowance, that should be there from, well, as soon as the tax year is over, because it's a consistent piece of information. So once somebody's put an ongoing claim in place with HMRC, then that information should just be available for a tax year until the time that they might revoke that claim. For Class 2 national insurance, the information should be available from the end of the relevant tax year, so from the 6th of April. So when you start working on tax returns. However, HMRC note that this might actually change if it happens that the Class 1 national insurance impacts on it, which then leads to when Class 1 national insurance is available. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the reconciliation process that HMRC go through. Class 1 NIC is one of these. And this starts in May and is usually complete by the end of August. So at some point in that period, Class 1 information will appear for clients, otherwise it shows as 0 before then. And then finally, all of the employment benefits, pensions information, that becomes available after what they call their PAYE reconciliation period. And this tends to start on early June and is usually finished around the end of September. Again, HMRC do note that where a taxpayer has benefits in kind, so they are expecting a P11D for a client, then they actually wait until after they've received the P11D before they run the reconciliation. So yeah, if a P11D is not being submitted, you're very unlikely to see any other information relating to the employment for a taxpayer.
Thanks, Amanda. And I think you may have covered all of Alistair's question, but I'll just read it and you can tell me if you didn't cover it all. And that is, he initially asked, can you run through the CCH central side of authorisation of DTA? And I was watching what you were doing. I think you've probably covered that. But just to be specific, what he asked was, how do we activate it at a practice level so all employees can view DTA for info for clients? Do we have to activate employees individually? So I don't know if you've covered all that already, but just in case you haven't, can I hand back to you?
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully what I went through earlier confirmed that no, you don't need to activate each employee unless the only place that you hold your user ID and password are in the employee record. If you use the tax system parameters area, then as I said, as long as you've got the information in here, this is actually the first place that when we're trying to look for the client's DTA information, this will be where we access it. So it looks at the client's record, it will take the, say for example, the office on that one, and it will try and use that information because we're assuming that the client is likely to be registered with HMRC under that particular office, and then that would work across all of your employees.
And just to add to that, with OneClick, an employee will need to be activated for OneClick in order to view the DTA. So I guess at an employee level, you will need to make sure that your employees are activated for OneClick in order to view that. Yeah, that's obviously different to what it was like before OneClick, where you would see a PDF, but now that we're adding so many more features and it's being done online, they will need a OneClick activation. Yeah.
Next question though is for Jeff. And Jeff, this question was specifically relating to Xero, but I assume relates to all the bookkeeping solutions that Open Integration connects to, unless each one is slightly different. So the specific question was, can you map multiple Xero codes into one CCH nominal code?
The question relates to this process here. So we had brought the data into Open Integration, and then we want to bring the data down into accounts production. So when around the demo earlier, we saw the mapping screen that popped up, and it was asking us to map 2 Xero nominal codes to the relevant AP codes. At the minute, the system only supports a one-to-one mapping. Okay, so through that this sync with Open Integration process, you can only map 1 Xero code to 1 AP code. I guess as temporary workarounds, the use of that F10 key to allow you to create a new code in AP on the fly is a way of overcoming this. You can create, for example, subcodes in AP and map the Xero codes to that. Now, the reason we have this limitation at the minute is, although we could very easily support many Xero codes mapped to 1 AP code when we're bringing data from Xero into AP, because we have this two-way synchronization, we need to do a bit more development to support the logic needed when you're going back the other way. So if you have a balance from 1 AP code and that AP code is mapped to many Xero codes, we need to know, the system needs to know which one of those Xero codes to push the balance back onto. So this is something that's we're aware of as currently a limitation, but we have definitely got plans to resolve this for a future release, so that it can support that many-to-one mapping.
Thanks, Jeff. Question for either yourself or Phil, perhaps. I know we touched earlier on connecting to other bookkeeping systems, and the specific question then was about Sage 50. But if you can expand perhaps on what plans we have for integrating with other bookkeeping systems in the future. Thanks.
So currently we have integration with obviously Xero, QuickBooks Online, Exact, Twinfield, and Sage One. We've talked about Sage 50, but as I'm sure you can imagine, we have a backlog of bookkeeping solutions that we would like to integrate with, and it's really on a priority basis. That'll be based on how many users are of those bookkeeping solutions. All I can suggest is that we have 1 or 2 currently in the development pipeline now that we're looking to deliver, and really there's no limit to how many we would like to integrate with, as long as there's enough demand to do so. So all I can suggest is like we've mentioned earlier, either using user voice or dropping some notes on this webinar of any solutions that you'd like to see, please just let us know, and we'll absolutely include that for inclusion in future releases.
Thanks, Phil. We now have a question for Amanda. The question is, I've noticed there's a quarterly reporting tab within the client record in CCH Central. Does this now reflect the quarterly submission data that we have just been shown, or was shown at the time the person asked the question?
Yes, it's pretty much the answer there, yeah. So once you have set your clients up in Making Tax Digital in OneClick, then the information that is shown on the quarterly reporting tab will now be reflected in CCH Central. So if I go to that clients tab, so quarterly reporting, you'll see we've got the business name, winter heating, bookkeeping provider 0, you've got the accounting period. Then you'll see it's the same information that we've got in the quarterly reporting tab. And what this also allows is actually if you are working within CCH Central and you click on that client, it would actually, it's VM's not set up to allow us access to that, but what that would do is actually open directly straight onto the client's quarterly reporting tab, so that you've got an easy way to get into that particular business.
When do you expect the CSV link to be available for open integration?
Again, that's one that is currently on our roadmap, and we are currently looking at that. I don't have a definitive timescale of when that'll be available, but one thing that I probably should have mentioned when I answered the last question was that we have actually also got our accounts production product also brings data through into the open integration. So if you are keeping books on behalf of your clients within accounts production, that will also work with the open integration and bring all that data through to quarterly reporting also.
And that covers it. That's all the questions that we've been asked this afternoon. So thank you for your time. I just want to finish off by making sure you're all aware where you can find the OneClick Resource Centre and the knowledge base. So on screen now you will see what you would see if you were logged into OneClick on the cloud, and you've got a support button down the bottom. And if you click on that, which Natasha will do now, that will take you to our website, and you can then from there access up in the top right in the menu the OneClick Resource Centre, or the larger icon to go into the knowledge base. The knowledge base, if you've not visited it for a week or two, has now got a lot more articles, and there are articles being added on a daily basis to that. And the Resource Centre, I think, is also continuing to be updated, but already has a lot of information, including videos. If you haven't already watched them, there's a few videos on there as well that may be of use.